Imagine the calm of a quiet night suddenly giving way to secrets hidden in the ordinary. I've learned the hard way that the world we think is safe can turn on a dime, revealing a side that's dark and unexpected. I've spent countless nights on empty roads and in secluded spaces where the only sounds are the soft patter of rain, the rustle of wind through the trees, the creak of old wood, and the distant wail of sirens. I've been a rideshare driver, a lone traveler, seeking refuge in a forgotten cabin, and every experience has left me with a lingering sense of unease. As I share these true stories with you, I want you to feel as if you're right there with me, listening to the subtle sounds that grow louder in your mind, noticing how a familiar routine can suddenly seem filled with hidden dangers. These moments taught me that every sound can carry a secret. Every shadow might hide a truth, and sometimes what appears normal is anything but. So sit back and listen closely, because these tales will make you question just how safe your everyday life really is. After that unsettling introduction, I can still remember one night that changed the way I see everything. I'd been on my usual late-night run, the roads empty and quiet, offering a strange sort of comfort in their solitude. There's something soothing about driving in the dark, the hum of the engine, the soft whisper of the wind, and the occasional creak of old metal blending into the background. That night, like many others, I was in my car, lost in thought and the rhythmic pulse of the road, when a ride request came through that I couldn't quite ignore. It was from a spot that looked completely abandoned, a small convenience store that, at first glance, seemed to be nothing more than a relic of a past era. The building was dark, the parking lot empty, and not a single light on, which made the request feel both out of place and oddly inviting in its mystery. I pulled up slowly, my instincts already on high alert, despite the usual calm of these late-night trips. As I approached, I saw a figure standing just outside the store, a person who seemed almost too still, almost as if they belonged to the shadows. When the passenger finally slid into the back seat, I couldn't help but notice how jittery and disheveled he appeared. His worn-out hoodie hung loosely on his frame, and his eyes, intense and piercing, locked onto mine in a way that sent a chill right down my spine. There was something about his silence that spoke volumes, a heavy, unspoken warning that made my gut twist in an uneasy knot. The ride started off with an almost suffocating silence. I tried to focus on the road, but every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of him in the rearview mirror. His stare never wavered, and his expression, a mix of anger and something I couldn't quite define, only deepened my discomfort. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was studying me, or perhaps even judging my every move. It wasn't long before he broke the silence in a low, gravelly voice, asking if I'd ever picked up someone I shouldn't have. His tone was matter-of-fact, yet there was an edge in it that made my heart race. I managed a nervous laugh, trying to brush off the creeping dread that was now settling over me like a heavy fog. As we drove, his words grew stranger and more cryptic. He muttered about trust, how it's something that can lead you into dark places if you're not careful, and shared snippets of past misfortunes in a way that felt both personal and disturbing. His conversation was punctuated by long silences, where his eyes seemed to say more than words ever could. Every time he spoke, it was as if he was revealing just a little too much, yet not enough to piece together the full picture of his troubled past. I remember the way his voice would drop to a near whisper, making it hard to distinguish whether he was reminiscing about old wounds or warning me of something far more immediate. Then came the moment that froze everything in a heartbeat. Without warning, he demanded that I pull over. The car's interior seemed to grow colder, and my pulse pounded in my ears as I slowly guided the car to the side of the road. In that split second, I saw flashing lights in the distance, police headlights cutting through the darkness. My mind raced with questions. Had I taken a wrong turn? Was this all part of his plan? Before I could process anything, the car fell into an eerie silence as he sat there, his gaze fixed on me. The flashing lights danced across his face, illuminating the lines of tension and something unspoken in his eyes. And then, just as suddenly as it had escalated, he vanished. One moment he was there, a silent force behind me, and the next, he was gone, as if swallowed up by the night itself. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, my hands still gripping the steering wheel tightly, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Relief mixed with a lingering terror that left my heart pounding long after the police lights had disappeared from view. the entire experience left me with an unsettling realization. In the dead of night, when the world seems so quiet and predictable, danger can lurk in the most unexpected places. I thought about all the times I'd trusted the anonymity of the dark, believing that solitude brought safety. That night shattered that illusion completely. In the aftermath, as I drove away and tried to shake off the terror, I couldn't help but wonder what had driven him to act the way he did. Had he been a victim of his own demons, or was he a harbinger of something more sinister, lurking in the shadows? The memory of that ride remains etched in my mind, a constant reminder that even the most ordinary nights can hold secrets that defy explanation. I started questioning everything about those fleeting moments in the back of my car, the way his eyes seemed to follow every turn I made, the cryptic words he chose to share, and the abrupt disappearance that left more questions than answers. It made me realize that trust, especially in the darkness, is a dangerous thing. There's a fine line between being open to new experiences and falling prey to the unpredictable whims of fate. Every time I drive at night now, I can't help but feel a subtle shiver of apprehension. I've learned to be more cautious, to trust my instincts even when they go against the grain of what feels normal. That night taught me that even in a world that appears safe and predictable, there are forces at work that can upend everything in a matter of moments. It's a lesson that has stayed with me ever since, a reminder that sometimes the scariest part isn't what you see, but what you can't explain. And while I continue to drive those quiet, lonely roads, a part of me is always waiting, alert to the possibility that the next ride might just be as haunting as the one that changed everything. After that harrowing ride, I knew I needed a change, a chance to escape the city's relentless noise and the memories that haunted my nights. I decided to move to a small, rustic cabin deep in the heart of the Pacific Northwest, hoping that the quiet solitude would help me heal. From the moment I arrived, the cabin wrapped me in an old-world charm that was hard to resist. The wooden beams and the low, creaking floors spoke of days gone by, while the stone fireplace hinted at many warm evenings. Stepping inside, I was greeted by a familiar yet comforting scent. The earthy aroma of pine mingled with the faint mustiness of old books, as if the cabin itself was preserving secrets of the past. Outside, the dense woods surrounded the cabin, their towering trees and tangled underbrush creating a natural barrier from the world, promising both shelter and isolation. Not long after settling in, I met Michelle, the only neighbor for miles. She was an enigmatic figure, an elderly woman with piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through you. Her presence was as mysterious as the weathered pages of a forgotten diary, and from our first encounter, there was something unsettling about her. One chilly afternoon, she ambled up the narrow dirt path leading to my door, carrying a small basket that she offered with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. In a soft, almost cryptic tone, she greeted me, and without missing a beat, delivered a piece of advice that left me with an inexplicable shiver. Always keep your lanterns full and your windows shut tight, she said, as though reciting a ritual rather than offering a friendly tip. It wasn't harsh, but it wasn't the typical neighborly warmth one might expect. Instead, it felt like a warning, one that I couldn't quite shake off, no matter how hard I tried. At first, I brushed off her words as the quirks of a person who had seen more than most in her long life. I focused on making the cabin my own, enjoying the tranquility that only nature can provide. But as the days grew shorter and the weather began to turn, a violent thunderstorm rolled in one night that changed everything. I was sitting in the living room, reading by the flickering light of a few candles, when the storm outside began to roar. The wind howled through the trees, and the rain pounded against the old windows, making the glass vibrate with each heavy drop. Amid the clamor of the storm, I heard a soft, persistent knock at the door. At first, I thought it was just the wind playing tricks, but as the knocking grew louder and more insistent, a feeling of dread crept over me. I hesitated, my heart pounding, wondering who or what could be out in such a tempest. Reluctantly, I rose to answer the door, only to find nothing but the lashing rain and the dark outline of the forest beyond. Yet, even in that empty space, I felt as if I was being watched. The sound of the storm seemed to echo with unseen whispers, and every creak of the old cabin made me jump. That night, sleep was a distant memory as I lay in bed, the wind's howls mingling with my own anxious thoughts. The next morning, I ventured outside to inspect the area around my cabin, trying to rationalize the events of the night before. It was then that I caught a glimpse of Michelle, or at least someone who looked very much like her. I saw her figure standing at the edge of the woods, half hidden by the early morning mist. For a moment, it wasn't clear whether she was simply walking her usual route, or if she had been out there all along, watching over the cabin. The sight sent another chill down my spine, and I couldn't help but remember her earlier words. Over the following days, the unexplained occurrences began to pile up. There were strange knocks on the door at odd hours, soft sounds that seemed to come from nowhere, and distant murmurs that vanished as quickly as they were heard. At times, I would catch fleeting movements in the corner of my eye, shapes darting between the trees, or shadows that didn't belong. The isolation that I had once craved now felt oppressive, and every creak of the wooden floor or rustle of leaves outside turned into a potential harbinger of danger. I found myself double-checking every window before bed, ensuring that all the lanterns were lit, just as Michelle had advised. Her words, once dismissed as the eccentricities of an old woman, now echoed in my mind with a foreboding clarity. One evening, as a heavy fog rolled in and muffled the sounds of the forest, I sat by the window trying to gather my thoughts. The cabin felt more like a fortress under siege than a safe haven. In the dim light of dusk, I noticed a familiar silhouette moving slowly along the edge of the property. It was Michelle again, or someone who looked exactly like her. This time, however, there was no basket in her hand, and her eyes seemed darker, filled with a secret that she wasn't willing to share. I couldn't tell if she was warning me or watching me, and the ambiguity was almost unbearable. The sight of her, lingering just outside the reach of the light from my window, made me feel that my sanctuary was being encroached upon by an unknown force. Every instinct told me to be cautious, yet I couldn't bring myself to confront her directly. The mystery of her presence gnawed at me, blurring the lines between neighborly concern and something far more sinister. In the days that followed, the tension only grew. I started noticing odd patterns, items that seemed to shift positions when I wasn't looking, distant sounds that echoed through the night, and an ever-present feeling that I was not alone. The isolation that I had once thought would bring peace was now a canvas for my mounting paranoia. Each night, as the wind rattled the windows and the woods whispered secrets, I couldn't help but wonder if Michelle's advice was a clue to a danger I had yet to fully understand. Her mysterious demeanor and cryptic warnings became the subject of my troubled thoughts, leaving me with a lingering doubt about her true intentions. Was she merely an eccentric old woman who cared about my safety, or was she part of a larger, more disturbing narrative that had enveloped this lonely stretch of forest? Reflecting on those uneasy nights, I began to question everything I had taken for granted about solitude and safety. The rustic charm of the cabin, which once promised a fresh start and a retreat from past traumas, had become a stage for unexplained events that shattered my sense of security. Every time I heard a knock at the door or saw a shadow flit past in the corner of my vision, I was reminded of Michelle's enigmatic advice and the thought that there might be more to her than met the eye. The isolation, which I had hoped would bring clarity and peace, instead magnified my fears and doubts. I started to realize that even in the quietest of places, the unknown can lurk just beneath the surface, waiting to upend everything you think you know about safety and trust. Looking back, I now see that the move to that secluded cabin was both a search for peace and a plunge into a realm of uncertainty that I hadn't anticipated. The beauty of the natural surroundings could not fully mask the eerie events that unfolded, leaving me with a deep-seated unease that continues to affect me. There's a part of me that still wonders if Michelle was really who she seemed to be, a gentle, if odd, neighbor, or if she was instead a harbinger of something more unsettling, a guardian of secrets too dark to reveal. The experience taught me that isolation has a way of magnifying not just the silence of the night, but also the voices of our hidden fears. And as I continue to live with the memories of those nights, I can't help but feel that the true horror lies in the uncertainty of who or what might be watching. from just beyond the flicker of a lantern's glow. After a while, as winter's chill set in and the festive season arrived, I found myself eagerly looking forward to a Christmas Eve drive that had become a cherished tradition. It was a night filled with the warm glow of family love, as we had spent the evening surrounded by laughter and good food after a heartwarming family gathering. The memories of that joyful reunion still made my heart smile as my partner and I piled into the car for our late-night drive. The roads were quiet and the air crisp, the snow gently dusting the world outside in a soft, peaceful silence. I had my favorite tunes playing softly on the radio, filling the car with nostalgic melodies that always reminded me of simpler times. The winter landscape was serene, a gentle contrast to the hustle and bustle of city life, with twinkling lights from distant homes and the subtle shimmer of frost on the roadside. For a brief moment, everything felt perfect and safe, as if the world had wrapped itself in a comforting blanket of tradition and love. But even on that magical night, an unexpected disruption was waiting to shatter the calm. Not long into our drive, my phone began to ring, an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. At first, I dismissed it as just another wrong number, a trivial interruption on what was meant to be a peaceful journey. I told my partner it was probably nothing, just one of those random calls that you ignore during a quiet night. However, the phone rang again, and then again, each time the sound piercing the silence of the car. With every ring, a sense of unease began to creep in, like a shadow slowly stretching over the bright lights of our festive drive. I answered the call the third time, expecting perhaps an apologetic voice or a hurried explanation. Instead, a deep, unfamiliar voice greeted me in a tone that was both calm and chilling. At first, the caller said nothing of consequence, just a few quiet words that barely registered in my mind. But then, as the minutes passed, the voice grew more insistent, its tone shifting subtly as it began to recite details about our evening that only someone who knew us well could possibly know. It mentioned the family gathering, the particular dish we had laughed about earlier, and even the small habits we had when driving together late at night. I exchanged a worried glance with my partner, whose smile had faded into a look of quiet apprehension. The festive bubble we had so carefully built began to crack, replaced by a creeping sense of dread that I couldn't quite shake. The calls became more frequent, each one arriving with an intensity that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. The mysterious voice spoke with eerie precision, as if reading from a script that knew every intimate detail of our lives. At one point, I heard it mention things that no stranger could possibly know: the specific route we took on our drive, the playlist we both loved, even personal details about my partner that had been shared only in whispers during quiet moments. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself that maybe it was a prank or a misguided joke from someone who had access to our information, but deep down, I felt an instinctive alarm go off. Then, as if the tension wasn't already unbearable, the tone of the calls shifted dramatically. The voice began to issue a direct threat, not aimed at me, but at my partner. It stated in a low, emotionless cadence that something terrible was going to happen to them, that our night of joy was about to take a dark turn. The words hung in the air like a storm cloud, and in that moment, the cozy drive we had been enjoying felt like it was unraveling into chaos. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I tried to process what was happening, while my partner's eyes widened in shock and fear. The car, once a vessel of our shared warmth and memories, now felt like a confining space where every second stretched into an eternity of anxiety. As we drove on, the calls continued to come, each one more unsettling than the last. I could feel the tension building in every fiber of my being, and the pleasant hum of the radio was drowned out by the persistent ringing of my phone and the haunting words of that unknown voice. The contrast between the serene winter night outside and the escalating terror inside the car was stark. Outside, the world was peaceful and decorated with the soft glow of holiday lights, but inside, the atmosphere was thick with fear and confusion. I found myself repeatedly checking the car's rearview mirror, half expecting to see a shadow lurking behind us, but there was nothing, only the endless stretch of road and the silent, indifferent dark of the night. I tried to reason with my partner, asking if they had any idea who could be behind these calls, but their answer was a trembling whisper of uncertainty. Every time the phone rang, it felt as though the safety we had taken for granted was slipping further away, replaced by the cold, unyielding grip of something malevolent. I remember the moment when I attempted to call back the mysterious number, desperate for some explanation, only to be met with silence, a silence so profound that it echoed louder than any voice could. The absence of sound only amplified the fear that had taken root in both of us, leaving us stranded in a state of unresolved terror. Eventually, our drive came to an abrupt halt as we reached our destination. The car rolled to a stop, and for a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of our ragged breaths mingling with the soft rustle of winter wind. We sat there in silence, the phone's glow casting eerie shadows on our faces, both of us trying to make sense of what had just transpired. The unresolved threat lingered in the air, an invisible presence that tainted the joy of the holiday season. There was no clear explanation, no comforting resolution, only the stark reality that something dark and inexplicable had intruded upon our most cherished tradition. In the aftermath of that night, the memory of the calls haunted me relentlessly. Even now, every time my phone rings, I can't help but feel a shiver of apprehension, a reminder that the terror we experienced on that Christmas Eve was far from over. That drive changed everything for me. It altered the way I view even the simplest, most beloved moments of life. The festive glow of Christmas, once a symbol of warmth and togetherness, now carries an undertone of uncertainty and fear. I often wonder who could have known so much about us, who could have crafted such a personal, disturbing threat, and what their intentions might have been. The experience left me with more questions than answers, and a deep-seated wariness that I carry with me every time I venture out into the night. Looking back, I realized that the night was meant to be a celebration of love and family, a moment of connection and comfort. Instead, it became a stark reminder that even in our happiest times, there can be hidden dangers lurking in the shadows. The calls on that Christmas Eve not only disrupted our drive, but also shattered the illusion of safety that we often take for granted. The memory of that night is etched into my mind, a painful, persistent echo that I cannot forget. It has forever changed the way I approach what I once considered to be sacred traditions, replacing carefree joy with a cautious vigilance that now accompanies every festive moment. Even as I try to embrace the holiday spirit, I can't escape the thought that somewhere out there, someone or something is watching, waiting for the next moment of vulnerability. And so, while the lights may twinkle and the carols may play, there remains an undercurrent of fear that serves as a constant reminder. Even the most cherished traditions can be upended in an instant, leaving behind an enduring sense of uncertainty and dread. When I think back on these stories, one thing becomes clear. There is only a thin line between normal life and sheer terror. The things that seem ordinary can turn into nightmares in an instant. These strange experiences have taught me that nothing is ever as it seems. They have changed the way I think, shattered my sense of trust, and forced me to always stay alert. Have you ever experienced something that still doesn't make sense? Something that lingers in your mind, making you uneasy in the silence of the night? Share your stories. Maybe we're not the only ones who have faced these unsettling truths.